So thank you all coming. My name is Joe Blankenship. I am the CDO for Certus Group, which is a Tampa-based company that specializes in doing data services and knowledge engineering solutions. And also a long time ago, I was a steward for the Bluegrass Developers Guild, which is super awesome. So today we'll just be going over my lessons learned in knowledge engineering. Once again, my background is in geography, so it's a world apart. But over years of abuse and just self-education, I came full circle around to needing a knowledge engineering solution, which is why I ultimately helped build and found a company around it. So today, once again, in about 20 minutes or so, we'll go over how I got here. So instead of doing it about me, I'm just going to go over the last 4 years of leaving Lexington and then coming back here to talk to you all. And then go over those big points of what I learned in terms of actually building a decent knowledge system, and yeah, hopefully get around to thinking better about how to run a business if you're thinking about running a business around building knowledge engineering solutions, which is a niche but also a good challenge to have. All right, so how did I get here? Well, my initial step was dropping out of a PhD program, which is always a good move. You commit a lot of years to doing that. But I felt confident that that was the right move, so I went and just took one of the job offers I had out there in the market and decided to go back down to Florida to do a lot of data science work for an organization that I was working for. So that's where my challenges would begin, was actually taking the job to produce those solutions. So originally I was hired as a senior data scientist to help guide consistent and rigorous modeling practices for what they were doing in the organization. And for one-off projects, they were able to do a really good job of producing good ML flow and getting stuff out to the customer in a deliverable format that was to specification. However, trying to do that twice in a row was very, very challenging. We couldn't abstract those processes, and often domain experts that came in to produce those first projects would leave the organization, leaving us at a gap in terms of how they actually went about reproducing those things in the first place. So I needed a way to take a step back and help curate metadata information about everything that those domain experts did in producing those solutions without having them actually physically there to answer questions for me. So I had to go back to data management and data governance principles to make sure that we were producing the metadata objects that we needed to gain that insight. So I took a step back. I bought a big old DAMA DM Bach 2 book on how to do data management and started teaching myself how to do data management and data governance policy for organizations that did small data science projects. And I wrote a book that is called Sushi that we'll look at later. I decided not to talk about that because that would have took forever. And ultimately I realized that I had also made mistakes in doing that because there were a lot of things that I didn't get ahead of writing the policy to get people to buy into the policy to actually use it. So if you write a huge thing and it's like, oh, that's great, that's really good, we could definitely use that, how are we going to do it? Like, if you didn't have a lot of stuff ahead of time to get people to adopt it, then you've wasted a lot of time writing a very detailed and useful manual that no one's going to use. So after doing that, I had an opportunity come to me. I had been wanting to build a system and actually implement what I had written up. And someone came to me and said, hey, we can offer you a lot of money to build a project if only you weren't working for this other customer. So I was like, well, I don't have to work for them. And I decided to quit that job. I started a company and ended up getting a SIBR to fund the knowledge engineering project that I actually wanted to build. The compromise is that I had to build a modular system for doing smart city digital twin simulations and build it on a World War II vessel, ultimately defacing the historical monument in the process. Ends up working really well. So I got to learn a lot about doing IoT data and actually doing all the data engineering that goes into that. So I was actually able to apply those data management practices and data governance policies to that IoT project. And had to do that in order to actually fund doing the knowledge engineering project. So that was the thing that I had to do in order to get to where I am now. So that's what I've been doing over the last 3.5, 4 years. Oh, and I'm also back in a doctorate program, by the way. It's like, that's, for some reason, that's my weird hobby, is doing graduate school. Probably need a better hobby. So the first step in doing knowledge engineering is knowing that there is actual knowledge engineering challenge. And that's really bright white, by the way. I should probably use a lighter color, Jesus. So starting off with what knowledge engineering is. Knowledge engineering is essentially combining the technical, scientific, and social aspects of building knowledge-based systems. And then the question of what is a knowledge-based system? Well, it's a combination of a knowledge base and an inference engine, just putting together what you know and how you know it, and actually using that to produce a system that can help you make better decisions by applying a series of logical systems to that. So what's a knowledge base? Well, that's just your collection of data that you have to look at and to essentially garner information and knowledge from to establish what you know about what you know. So the problem with that is that a lot of people say like, hey, knowledge graphs are cool, I want to see a knowledge graph. Can you implement a knowledge graph solution? And I'm like, well, I don't know if you have a knowledge challenge. If you just need something that does descriptive statistics to get you to a point where you can make a good decision on this part of your business model, then you don't really need a knowledge graph or a knowledge base. You just need to get these data sets in line and produce the statistic on that. So the biggest challenge in building any of this stuff is to first establish the problem, then also to know where they are in their data lifecycle management processes. If they don't have a data warehouse or a data lakehouse, if they don't have a data catalog, if they don't have a self-service data mart, if they don't know what any of that means, then they're probably not ready for the next step up of actually looking at how they structure content management around that, and then ultimately how they put processes on top of all that stuff to get actual knowledge system. So what information do you need or want? Once again, this is leading into the next point on requirements. Like, there has to be a lot of thought by the customer and by you as a person implementing the solution to actually think about what they actually need, because ultimately that system, if you're doing data-driven decision-making of some sort, has to meet their business mission, vision, goals, and ultimately kind of connect the value and impact they want to make with that system with the resources they're going to need to implement that system in the first place. And last but not least, and this is one of the biggest mistakes I made in that early data management and data engineering transition, was knowing who my champions were. So implementing a system like this is challenging in of itself, but you need someone in the organization that's going to be your voice box to their leadership and telling them, we're doing this knowledge system because we need A, B, and C outputs to create XYZ effects in our business model for positive and valuable impact. So if they're going to be implementing a knowledge graph or a knowledge base, or they're going to be implementing some kind of engine to produce some kind of business logic, then there has to be a clear value added to the leadership. And you need someone inside the organization that speaks that organization's language, is in tune with that organization's culture, to actually help you sell that to them and to make sure that what they're buying is actually what they need rather than what you have. So knowing their challenge, knowing your challenge, and then knowing where you meet in the middle to implement that is a pretty important step in that process. The next part is requirements, all the requirements. Just make sure you interrogate them persistently to know what you can do, what they need, and exactly what that means in terms of actually implementing a solution for them. So once again, it's checking, make sure they actually have a knowledge problem. Like I said, if they just have a data problem and they need data management stuff, then that's easy. And as a person that's doing ethical data engineering practices, you can easily tell them like, hey, this is probably your best first step solution. Maybe we're not the best company to do this. Maybe there's another service provider that can help you better structure these things. Get that first. We'll come back in a year and revisit whether you actually need a knowledge base or a CMS or some other system in place for your business model. Also, identify who the domain experts are for their organization. If the knowledge base that you're building is around a certain practice or a certain sector that that company is in, then you need to make sure that the experts inside that organization are there to give voice to the process and also help justify the building of the system and actually help you establish what the system's going to do that's going to positively impact that organization and the people inside of it. So those domain experts ultimately are going to help you establish what the priority entities and relationships are inside that system. So if you're going to be building a knowledge graph, a knowledge base, it's about things and processes with other things, then you need to have the people that know what those processes are and those things inside those networks to help you better align data, information to that knowledge-based system and ultimately help you drive better systems to help them make decisions for the company or organization or whatever they're building it for. So does the solution support the organization's vision, mission, and goals? And once again, this is highly subjective, organizationally dependent. But ultimately, as a person providing the solution to a customer or to an organization, you need to make sure that you start with the requirements, you get all the key stakeholders that are in the organization, make sure they're all around the table to talk, make sure they do talk, because ultimately a lot of times in that process, having good qualitative methods to gather information from individuals, from subgroups, from groups, do proper social network analysis, gather statistics, surveys. There's a lot of stuff that can go into doing requirements ahead of time. But ultimately, it sounds like a lot of work. It is a lot of work. But it's better than you jumping the gun saying like, yes, I want to make money. I want to sell you my product. And then realize that A, you either can't do the work, or B, you're not going to be able to provide the product in time or in a shape that's going to actually produce anything useful for them. So it's better to have good rep and not get paid for it than to have bad rep by doing a job that was technically correct but produces zero value for the customer. So, and once again, Sushi is the requirements framework, and I think it makes adorable requirements. So, at least the sticker's cool, Okay, so knowing the challenge, requirements. So let's say that both those things go really, really well. And we know they definitely have a challenge that your product can produce, and they definitely need a knowledge base to help produce a good system that helps them make data-driven decisions. The requirements align with what you can do and what they need, and the product that you have actually does something for them. Then we have to ask, how are we going to collect the metadata that's going to feed into the system? What metrics is that metadata going to be facilitating, and how is that going to equate to either value or impact for the organization? And how is the system going to capture all this? So how do you know what the solution is doing for the organization? Well, once again, we should establish who the key actors are, what processes are going on. The domain experts are going to help you really guide that process. But ultimately, once again, you have to make sure that whatever artifact inside whatever systems are being used or applied by that organization are pumping out data that you can actually store inside that knowledge base, and that the knowledge base has structures, schemas, ontologies, taxonomies that help you structure ultimately what the metrics are going to be to measure value or impact. So once again, make sure those things actually show demonstrably how the solution is valuable to the customer. And once again, having solid metrics are good, whether those are quantitative or other. So once again, value is subjective, so that's where your champion that you gathered earlier in the process is going to help you translate what leadership is looking for in terms of value impact. A lot of times when you're engaging with leadership, they have a very pie-in-the-sky look, a very meta look of how things are supposed to go. Ultimately, you as a technical implementer can't really get much out of that. You need someone that can help you break down the processes and sub-processes that they're actually referring to at a high leadership level, and actually make sure that each of those sub-processes can be measured or observed in some way that can help you demonstrate that something valuable is occurring through your system for the organization. So, is a solution actually helping people? Ultimately, the most important customers you're going to have are the internal customers to the organization that's going to be using your system. If they don't like using the system, if they're going to be involved in both curating and governing how metadata is generated and curated, if you have them hating the way your system actually produces metrics or visualizations or the knowledge graph itself, or ontologies are too tough, how do I govern entity logic or axioms, they're just not going to use your system. If they fail to use a system, or they fail to observe or do monitoring or lifecycle management for stuff, every gap in that process is a failure in your knowledge base that you're going to have to account for as a knowledge gap. So making sure that people are happy with the system and the solution, make sure the training is there for them to persistently use the system over time correctly, will help you ultimately prove value to the customer, because everybody's using the system that the company paid for, and ultimately that's going to help the organization measure value and impact much better. So will people continue using it once the solution is fully implemented? Who knows? I think everybody here that's developed software has had someone like, oh, this is great, and they use it for a little bit, and then it just completely drops off. It's like, oh, the new thing came out, I'm now using the new thing. This is a challenge that you'll always have to face, no matter what solution. So I think the answer is established in the first two things, knowing what their challenge is and gathering the right requirements. Because if you take the time to understand what everybody really hates about what they're currently doing, you know I need to do the exact opposite most of the time. Some people hate things just because that's their job, is to complain about the thing that they need to do, but they don't do it. Those are outliers. Most people have solid grievances with what they do and how they do it, and they would like to see more impact being made in the organization. They're just stopped by a reason or a couple reasons. If you can overcome those reasons and show like, hey, my system resolves your grievance, you can essentially help people understand that there is logical value in actually doing these things. Though difficult they may be for the long term of the organization. If you can get to use it for a year and a half, that's quite a bit of data that can be used to show like, hey, we have process improvement here. This metric is showing real improvement in this sector here. So once again, as long as you're curating metadata and everybody's doing that consistently, we're looking at the metrics, make sure the metrics reflect what we want to measure in terms of value and impact, then you should be able to know whether or not your knowledge base or knowledge engineering solution is producing some kind of effect in the organization that's actually constructive to what they need done rather than what they want done. I'm trying to see what we're doing. Okay, well, we're doing good on time here. So last but not least, from a lot of those things are from the customer's perspective. So from the service provider perspective, I'm always thinking about work. It's not just about the customers and the market change. I'm really concerned about how I, as a knowledge engineer, someone doing knowledge engineering, producing knowledge-based systems for customers, actually having a knowledge graph system coming out next year, I want to know not just how my customers are going to react, but how I'm going to use it internally myself. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to be my number one customer. So I want to make sure that I'm not just looking at what sells best in the market, what's the best piece of software that someone's going to buy at volume. I want to make sure that I'm happy with the thing I'm using myself. So Certus, we're our biggest customers in using our own systems, not just in terms of data management, data governance, the knowledge base, but in building a culture around doing good data work and making sure that data engineering is solid all the way through. So I'm very lucky to be with two great co-founders who are extremely talented engineers and data scientists and computer scientists, and can really help me cover the gaps in my knowledge and skill sets to where we're kind of mutually helping each other grow in certain areas. So, and that's reflected in the systems that we use and implement and how we engage with customers as well. So it helps me balance my growth and also helps me understand how others, like my employees, help want to grow too, because I want to see them transform as employees. I want to make sure that they're not just using the systems I tell them to use or doing what I tell them to do, but that they're doing things that they see value in because it helps them improve themselves in some way, shape, or form. Could be learning new skills, could be getting certifications, improving communication within each other, make sure open door policies are there, stuff like that. So I want to make sure that, if I harp about, knowing the challenge and getting requirements, stuff like that, I want to make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching. I want to make sure that in any way, shape, or form, if I'm building a knowledge-based system or doing any knowledge engineering, data engineering, whatever it is, that everybody has feels free to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Because, it wouldn't be a very healthy culture if they couldn't tell me that I'm jacked up and that I need to fix something. It's like, yeah, okay, good. Because it's better that they do it than I get to a customer side and they're like, yeah, your stuff is really messed up. So, and I think that's about it. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long or go too anything there, but yeah, let's see. Cool. And there's my website. Those guys built it, so. Cool, I think that's it, yeah. It's like, well, if you have any questions, just hit me in the social. I'll be in there afterwards, so. Cool, thanks, man.